If I do, if I fall, don't bring me back.
I'll have to try.
I'm ordering you not to bring me back.
Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you're like most Game of Thrones fans, you hated the final season of the show, and how Benioff and Weiss destroyed established character arcs and wrote nonsensical endings for every plot. Some people are even still having nightmares about it. Because the series ended so ridiculously, many welcomed a Jon Snow spin-off show to right the wrong so that they could finally bury the memory of Dan and Dave's disaster. In June of 2022, Variety reported that the series was in development at HBO. George R. R. Martin confirmed it on his Not a Blog site, writing, "Yes, there is a Jon Snow show in development. Our working title for the show is Snow." It didn't sound as if George was very enthusiastic about the show because then he quickly pivoted to the other series that were also in development. The reveal of the potential Jon sequel happened about 2 months before the premiere of Season 1 of House of the Dragon. And that's why I've always felt, even when the announcement was made, that the Jon Snow show was their break in case of an emergency series. If House of the Dragon had failed and done poorly in the ratings, Jon was their fallback option. And I'll get to why they don't want to do both in a bit, but this next part is important in understanding what I think their approach to all of this is. In the very first episode of House of the Dragon, Aegon's prophecy was mentioned.
Aegon foresaw the end of the world of men. It is to begin with a terrible winter, gusting out of the distant north. All of Westeros must stand against it. And if the world of men is to survive, a Targaryen must be seated on the Iron Throne.
They featured the prophecy so prominently in House of the Dragon because they want to build a franchise around it. The plan at HBO is to have the franchise cover numerous stories in George's world. We're going to get the Night of the Seven Kingdoms Dunk and Egg series likely in 2025. And there's also an Aegon's Conquest show in development, which will carry on the thread of the prophecy.
Aegon called his dream the Song of Ice and Fire. This secret, it's been passed from king to heir since Aegon's time. Now you must promise to carry it and protect it.
Of course, the prophecy is tied into A Song of Ice and Fire, and it'll be good for a number of series in the timeline that runs from the Conquest to the events in Game of Thrones. So, some of you might be saying, okay, great, but why can't they still do the Jon Snow series too? Well, it defeats their purpose of telling the real full story of Aegon's prophecy in The Long Night because Benioff and Weiss already messed things up so badly. George wasn't happy with the result of Game of Thrones. Dan and Dave stopped consulting him after Season 4, and it was in Season 5 where things began to start to go off track. What we saw in Seasons 7 and 8 was not A Song of Ice and Fire, but the lazy, unfocused, rushed, and poorly written ramblings of two guys that wanted to move on to Star Wars.
Learn to use the dark side of the Force.
I will do whatever you ask.
Good.
So as difficult as it might be for some fans to not have closure from the mess that was devised while the showrunners were in some sort of fugue state, doing a Jon Snow series would be to accept what happened as canon, and there's no way they want to acknowledge that. But let's put that aside for a moment and pretend that HBO overcame their doubts and greenlit the project. After all, we're in a world where the MCU and DC have instituted the multiverse in so many different films. So it's conceivable that many fans could compartmentalize the two series and look at them differently. Even in this scenario, there's not much of a story to tell. Jon isn't even king in the North anymore. He's just wandering beyond the wall with the wildlings. And in the early seasons of the show, we got to see a lot of what it's like in the North. But now the wildlings are no longer enemies, and the White Walkers are gone. There's just no conflict there. I guess you could write a story where some White Walkers remain even after the death of the Night King, but after how all that ended, does anybody really want to pick up that story where they left it off? About the only thing you could do to have conflict would be to make Bran the enemy, and say that the Night King warged into him prior to his death. And while that doesn't sound bad at first glance, executing the idea would be very difficult and would come across largely as fan fiction. It would have sort of all the originality and feel as a Halloween series movie where Michael Myers returns again. There is also a sensitivity at the network to not oversaturate the audience with too many shows. Executives have commented on this numerous times. It's why only House of the Dragon and the Night of the Seven Kingdoms series have been officially greenlit. I think you can expect the Aegon's Conquest one to be next in line, but I don't see that being announced until we're approaching House of the Dragon's final season. So all these factors work against us ever seeing a Jon Snow series. The main obstacle is still the first one I mentioned, the future franchise around Aegon's prophecy in A Song of Ice and Fire, and like with so many things, to move ahead, you have to leave the past behind. With how botched the ending of Game of Thrones was, and all the disgust and disappointment that is still embedded in the memories of fans, it doesn't do the network any good to remind people of all of that, no matter what sort of story you have planned.
Is there a character that you would love to see a spin-off with?
No, I'm committed to these prequels. I mean, I think this story ends when it ends.
If you enjoyed the video, make sure to hit the like button, and if you're interested in more on A Song of Ice and Fire and House of the Dragon, listen to Caraxes and subscribe. I want to thank everyone for watching, and I'll see you soon.